I found out about the Ghost Army. Maybe some of you know a little bit about it. It's been in the news lately. I found out about it after it was declassified after 50 years in 1996. And actually, the Smithsonian snuck out an article about it in the 70s, and immediately after World War II, when all the soldiers came home, a newspaper article came out about it. So there were a couple of leaks, but the government closed it back up again because we were in the Cold War, and they wanted to make sure that the secret operation didn't leak out too much. So when I found out about it, I was an art student at the time, and I was so happy and thrilled to learn that artists, writers, set designers, songwriters, they all helped win the wars, substantially saving lives, hundreds of thousands of lives. And we had a running argument in our family that an art career was not a lucrative career. And so I now had something else in my arsenal to say, yeah, but it could be a patriotic affair. And actually, a couple of my uncles that were in World War II, they were also in the Army themselves, and they were, excuse me, they were artists themselves. So when I found out about it, I looked into it. I didn't know much about it, but when I came to the Pratt Museum, this was after the flood, one of my jobs was to learn the genealogy of Zadock Pratt, which is in this wonderful book called The Genealogy of the Pratt Family. And it goes all the way back to Richard the Lionhearted. And we found out that Richard the Lionhearted had a right-hand man and a left-hand man that were his close buddies, and they were John and William Pratt. They were descendants they were the ancestors of our current Zadock Pratt. And there's a wonderful story. I don't want to take up too much time, but telling this ancestral story, but only because the Pratt family has a history of supporting democracy. And it goes back, it's inbred into them from centuries ago. This is the 11th century, 12th century, that the original John and William Pratt were the supporters of Richard the Lionhearted. And the story goes, and this is documented, that on the Second Crusade, when Richard the Lionhearted was spending very little time in England, a lot of time in the Far East, trying to reconquer Jerusalem from the infidels, that they called them, that they were taken, he and his soldiers were taken prisoner, and Saladin he was very boastful because he got these royal regiment. So he said, "Who among you is Richard the Lionhearted? I know you're here." And William Pratt stood in front of his king and said, I am the king. And this is all impromptu. And they took him prisoner, and he was imprisoned for years until England, with their king, could raise enough money to get their king back, which was a common thread of history. So now we're up to Zadock Pratt's time. Zadock Pratt, his name is Zadock Pratt, actually Jr. I think most of you know that by now, because his father was also Zadock Pratt. And his father, we don't have a picture of him, but he's buried right here in Jewett under 2 hemlock trees. And he actually died in this house. This house was built at the time that he passed away, and Pratt took care of him as he was passing away. But Zadock Pratt Sr., and he didn't sign his name Sr. until his 5th child and 2nd son was born. That's Zadock Pratt Jr. But at age 20, He was only 3 months into being 20 years old. He, along with his Connecticut militia up in Saybrook, answered the call to the shot that was heard around the world on April 19th, 1775. And by that night, the alarm system the colonials had at that time was so intricate and so, I guess, clever, that they were able to alert the entire 13 colonies by nightfall, far into the night, that the British had attacked at Lexington and Concord. So by the time the British were marching back to Boston, being harassed by the Patriots, the father of Zadock Pratt was already on his way doing the march with his militia, the 127 miles by foot from Saybrook, the Connecticut coast, all the way up to Bunker Hill. And they were successful in getting rid of the British kind of out of Boston for the time being. And after that, Zadock Pratt, this is a very important part too, because I think it is why Zadock Pratt held the principles that he did throughout his life, and why we have a street here called Washington Street. Zadock Pratt Sr. he continued to fight after the Battle of Bunker Hill. They were moved, this time by boat, right down to New York, and they were participated in the Battle of Brooklyn, which is the first major battle of the Revolution. And the Americans were really walloped. They were overwhelmed by the Tories on Long Island that betrayed them. So Zadock Pratt Sr. was taken prisoner along with a lot of his militia. The rest of Washington's troops got across the river back into New York City, and Zadock Pratt was taking a beating after that. The British were very cruel to their prisoners. They actually didn't consider that they would have prisoners or that they would have that many, and also they looked down on the Patriots as vermin, as disgusting people. But Zadock Pratt Sr. was first taken to the Sugar House, which is a notorious, horrible, horrible prison. He was starved for 3 days before being shipped over to the Whitby. And anybody from Brooklyn knows about the Whitby prison ships in the Brooklyn Harbor by Gowanus Canal. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Gowanus. Yeah, well, Zadock Pratt had been hiding in the swamp, the Gowanus Canal, for 2 nights before the British found him and took him prisoner. So on the Whitby, he was suffering from diseases, degradation, starvation. His sister came down, his only sibling, because his father had died when he was 5. His mother had remarried. And his sister caught smallpox. And she went back to Saybrook and died. They were very, very close. And Zadock Pratt himself, Sr., survived the smallpox. Throughout his life, he never, ever forgave the British for their cruelty of treatment, which was extreme. And they...
Sorry about that.
That's okay. And I think that's what formed Zadock Pratt's character, and all his children, all his siblings. They were very devoted to the ideals that they grew up in a democracy where their father grew up in a tyranny. Their father was an Englishman, and they were Americans. They were born Americans. When Pratt came here, the first street he built was Washington Street, because his father adored Washington.
How much you have, like 5 minutes? How much you have?
Oh, it's just the introduction.
Okay.
Yeah, no, don't worry, you'll catch on. So then we come to Zadock Pratt. He gets born during the Revolution, well, right after. His sisters get born during the Revolution, because Zadock Pratt, his father, is going back and forth on foot from New York and New Jersey battles up to Saybrook to start his family, which he felt was very important, to have a lot of kids and to fight for democracy. So, Brett, what did you say? I could hit
Down
enter?
arrow.
Or, that's not working. Oh, touch it. There.
There you go. Sure, she'll be, yeah, go ahead. That's the first switch. Would you mind? First one. Thank you.
Not too bright, but
Hanging out for you.
this is Zadock Pratt on the left.
Keep moving by itself.
It's alive. This painting is Pratt, the first thing Pratt had made when he first became wealthy as a tanner. He could afford to have his portrait taken. And it's, we have a running discussion with People's Island up in New York State, up
That
in,
his first wife?
well, I'll tell you in a minute.
He had 5 of them, didn't he? He had 5 wives, right?
He did, but I'll get to that, yeah.
Not all at the same time, though.
I know.
Yeah, in fact, that 5 wives story is actually, people kind of giggle when they hear it, including myself when I first came here. But the story is really a tragic one about how women died in the 19th century. And Jay Gould in Roxbury, he had 4 wives. He told Pratt he
Did
could.
they all get sick fast? How come?
Well, there were a lot of reasons. Number one, in the case of Zadock Pratt's wife, Abigail, who was his 3rd wife, his first 2 wives died of consumption. They had come down from Saybrook, which is near the shore, and was infested with tuberculosis. Consumption is
You can't
tuberculosis.
get that today, can you?
Yep, you
You
get it
get that
today,
today,
but
too.
we have antibiotics and drugs. They didn't then, and it's a horrible death. The first cause of death among women was childbirth. And that's another horrible death. I mean, people say it off their tongue, you know, she died of childbirth. You see it all the time. But it's such a horrible death when the sepsis finally sets in that Jay Gould told Pratt that he didn't have enough courage to take on a 5th wife because he was so pained with the passing of his 4th wife. Zadock Pratt, however, he rallied and he did take a 5th wife toward the end of his life. I do want to point out that this painting that he had done was by a local painter that he was familiar with named John Vanderlyn. John Vanderlyn was one of the important first artists of America. And he lived down here in Kingston. He was a Dutch painter. His father was a Dutch painter. And they remained friends. And toward the end of Vanderlyn's life, Zadock Pratt got him a commission to paint a mural on the inside of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. So that painting up there was due to Zadock Pratt helping his buddy from his youth get that commission. The second painting is also, it's actually a double painting. She's holding her son on his lap, on her lap, and that was their first child. His name was George Pratt, and as Carolyn
I saw
told you,
that picture they had it here. Yeah, yeah.
it's here, yeah. In fact, if you go in the other room, you can see it. So Zadock Pratt had a first child by Abigail in 1830, a second daughter, Julia, 2 years later. This is Julia. There's a beautiful picture of Julia when she was only 18 years old, and she was getting ready to be betrothed. Her marriage was kind of encouraged. This is an older, when she's an older woman, and she looks a little less than cute
That
here.
his daughter, you're saying?
She was the daughter of Zadock Pratt, that's what it says underneath. She was also the wife of Colin Ingersoll. Now this Colin Ingersoll was another congressman. By this time, Zadock Pratt was a congressman in the US Assembly. He had already been a New York State senator, and he had already run for governor. The people wanted him here in his district, wanted him to run for governor. He lost by a very, very narrow margin to be the governor of New York. But he went into, because people were requesting it, he went into the congressional, he represented his congressional district. And while he was there, he never missed a single day in Congress. And that's a record to this day that has been held. He's the only one to have ever done that. And while he was there, he got so much done, which would take another volume. Carol and I have often talked about getting somebody to write his biography. It would take 8 volumes to
And
cover
the guy
his.
is really big too, right?
Yeah. So she had married a fellow congressional congressman who was, of course, younger than Zadock Pratt and was in the next congressional seating, not the same one. And his name was Colin Ingersoll, and she had 5 children, as Carolyn said. The middle one was Colin Jr., Colin II. And this is a this is a, what do you call that? That's a copy of a painting that Ralph Ingersoll's son, Ian Ingersoll, sent me, that was painted by a friend of mine's grandmother, who was one of the unknown female painters of the 19th century that was so popular. She was painting Teddy Roosevelt. She was painting, she painted everybody that was politically and a celebrity. She also painted Colin Ingersoll Jr., which tells us how prestigious this family was. Unfortunately, Julia was the only one surviving in her immediate family. Her father had passed away by the time she was an older woman, and so she inherited much of his wealth. Of course, the daughter-in-law that married George, the widow of George Pratt, also received some of his estate. The estate was split. Zadock Pratt was the 7th richest man in America during his lifetime. So and it was all from tanning, and not just tanning in Prattsville, which started his wealth, but he also had tanning businesses in other places like Pennsylvania and I forget where else, but he had a couple. And also he had his son in the leather merchant district down in Manhattan on Gold Street. So George Pratt, before the Civil War, the leather merchants are where the money was made. So George Pratt was making all this money for his father and his family. So Julia ended up being extremely wealthy, and she married into one of the most prestigious and I'm sure wealthy families of Connecticut. I don't know much about the Ingersolls. I do know they go all the way back to Massachusetts Bay Colony. The whole lineage of the Ingersolls down to Colin was, they were either Supreme Court justices, governors of Connecticut, or lieutenant governors of Connecticut. They were all cerebrally minded citizens. And when Ralph Ingersoll Jr. writes his book, he didn't write it, it's his authorized biography by Roy Hoops in 1986, right before he died. In fact, he didn't see it. It came out after he passed away. But in it, he wrote that the best thing that my grandfather, Colin II, ever did was to marry Zadock Pratt's daughter. He said, because all of our lineage was cerebral, he said, and Zadock Pratt worked with his hands. And he said, that's how I was able to have all my creative input, because I wasn't just in my head, like he used to say that his father had ancestor worship going all the way back to the beginning, that they were like very holy people in Connecticut and Massachusetts. So he always said, thank God that my grandfather married Zadock Pratt's daughter. So from this union, we have Ralph. Ralph is the third child of Colin Ingersoll II, yeah. Yeah.
You say it right here, the second.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, son of Colin Ingersoll II, and the grandson of Julia Pratt. I get so mixed up with this. I think I know it.
I told you why I need the picture.
I know, I wrote it. But I have to get out scraps of paper and go over it and over it, because when I start thinking about it, I don't know if you people are familiar with genealogy, but it is so, it's like
a maze.
a maze, and you're a sleuth, you're a detective, you find little bits of information, you're trying to put everything together to piece a picture that's fairly making your heart pound, and then I can't remember what I said. So he's the father of the present generation of Ingersolls that are with us today. Ian Ingersoll, and who's the younger brother, and Ralph Ingersoll III, who's the older brother. And Ian was kind enough to communicate with me, and he sent me a photograph of his gold medal that he received from the Congressional Award back in March 20, I think it was 21st of this year, when the gold, the highest civilian honor that can be awarded to a civilian in this country, was given to the survivors of the Ghost Army soldiers. Or there were only 7 left at the time in March, but and now there's only 3 left.
I called in ghost.
I'm going to get to that too. So I'm going to show you that at the end. I was really touched that I asked, well, I asked him if he had the whole gold medal in his house, and he said it was just given to me. And he said, I'll send you a picture for the Pratt Museum's talk on the Ghost Army. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the Ghost Army. The Ghost Army's real name was the 23rd Headquarters Operations, 23rd Headquarters Special Operations. It was a secret regiment. Nobody knew about it in the Army. It was top secret. That's why it was kept under wraps for all that time. And everybody, when they left the Army, there were 1,100 people in this body, and when they left the Army, they all had to sign a piece of paper, a confidentiality clause. And
London?
Pardon?
The UK, right? It says London.
Yeah.
I thought that was New York.
No, it's London, England. This is about World War II.
Oh, okay.
That's where it took place. So the letter that they got was thanking them for their unusual courage, their unusual creativity, their blend of impromptu, rising to the occasion for any situation that arose, and P.S., good luck in civilian life, and if you dare tell anybody about this, you'll be shot on sight. That was their parting gift from the Army. So when the people that were interviewed, the descendants of the Ghost Army soldiers, back in March, were given the awards. They were being interviewed by the press, and one of the daughters was happily bubbling away. She said, I didn't know my father was in the Ghost Army. She said, we have 5 kids at home. She was an older woman. And she said, when we used to ask Daddy, what did you do in the war? He used to look at us and say, I blew up tanks. And he was right, but it never dawned on the kids that he meant blew up tanks, because that's what the Ghost Army was about. It was a total army, I don't know if you call it a company. It was devoted to deception. So there's been deception throughout history in the Bible, biblical deception. George Washington used deception down at the Battle of Princeton. But there never was one that was totally devoted. All the other soldiers and all the other deceptions throughout history, even the Roman deceptions, they all went back to being soldiers. But these guys stayed as deceivers. Now here's where Ralph Ingersoll comes in. Ralph Ingersoll Jr., he gets wind that World War II is starting, and like Hemingway, he wants to be in the thick of it. He's a crackerjack writer. He really is a good writer. I couldn't stop reading his unpublished manuscript about his part in the Ghost Army, because they had to sign a confidentiality clause that they couldn't talk about it. So he wrote about it, but he deleted anything that would be harmful, that would be jeopardize the secrecy. So he said. But he wanted to be in the middle of this war. Hemingway was in World War I, about 12 years older than Ingersoll, but they were both reporters. Ingersoll was already an author of several books, and he had already been in North Africa. And I've come from a military family, but I can't keep military things straight in my head. So if some of this is a little wobbly, that's why. But he did say that he wanted to go in as a private in case he got a commission, because he came from the wealthiest family in Connecticut, that he might be elevated, which he was. He was elevated by the time the war was over. And he was part of the planning of this deception unit. And Ralph Ingersoll, for all the things that are said about him, and he's quite a controversial character, I've read all kinds of things about him, that he's flamboyant, he's a narcissist, he was practically the starter of Life magazine, Esquire, the New Yorker, and of course PM newspaper was his own idea, a newspaper without any advertisements, because he didn't want anybody influencing his opinions. And of course it folded within 6 months. Somebody picked it up and kept it running with advertisement. But he really was a good bullshitter. And this is what his friends and his enemies say. There was a couple quotes, but it's too hot to open the book. This guy, they never met anybody like him that could bullshit his way out of any situation, had the most outrageous ideas, and would make them work. Now his counterpart in the Ghost Army, he was actually, it was his idea. A lot of other people came in, so he can't claim sole idea, but the idea of a total deception army was so appealing to him, he contacted all his friends in Hollywood, his writers, the producers, because he was a celebrity, and he hobnobbed as an aristocrat.
Is there a movie about him?
Not about him, not yet. But there is a movie about, PBS did a movie about the Ghost Army.
Oh, they did?
Yeah,
I'll look it up.
you can look it up. So he got his set designers, his painters. He got people from Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. He got people from Cooper Union who happened to have teachers. These are the art students there. They happened to have teachers that were so in tune with what was going on. America wasn't in the war yet, because Pearl Harbor didn't happen yet. But the teachers there were so tuned into knowing what was coming that they actually started courses on camouflage as part of the, And these are not, when we speak of any of these things, they were not just fly-by-night courses. These were in-depth things. These students actually covered a whole factory, acres and acres long, with canvas camouflage, painted to look like the country. They put a lake in the middle. They put a couple of cows, a couple of...
They know what they were doing.
Yeah, they covered where the B-52 bombers were made. So when the reconnaissance planes were flying over, it looked like the countryside. They often did that with towns, whole towns. They would cover whole towns with camouflage and then set up another camouflage. This was in England where they were practicing, where they would paint a town on the camouflage.
You got pictures of that?
There are pictures online.
Oh, okay.
So that when the German reconnaissance went overhead, they would drop the bombs on the fake town,
You're on the fake.
and the real town survived.
You're that good.
Yeah, they saved a lot of
Yeah,
people.
they did.
Now, Britain was in the war since 1939. That's when Poland was invaded. So they were the last light in Europe that could survive the German attack, and they were on an island. Everything else was covered by the Nazi army, except for the neutral places like Sweden and Spain and Portugal and Switzerland, of course. So England was holding out all by itself, trying like heck to get America to come in and help, but America was split. Half the people didn't want any thing to do with any European war. They said enough is enough. But in the meantime, the munitions factories were already supplying equipment to England, so we were already in war mode. But once Pearl Harbor happened, December 7, 1941, we declared war on Japan, and of course Hitler declared war on us happily, and that's when America went to work with this. So Ingersoll has a lot of interesting experiences. He's a likable guy. If you meet him, he's very charming. I don't think you could help not like him.
Is he alive?
No, he passed away in 80.
Oh, you were saying you
Six.
could meet him, but he died.
If you were to meet
Oh,
him.
I didn't know what you were talking.
Okay.
I thought he was still alive.
No.
Okay.
I'll just tell you a couple things.
He's a ghost.
What time is he now? What time is he now?
1:40.
It's 1:40.
Oh, I've got 5 more minutes to cover the whole rest of it.
No, we didn't say that, but I had hoped that we could limit questions to the end.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
It's okay, come on.
Speak up a little bit for that.
Okay. So Ralph Ingersoll Jr. had some interesting things in his unpublished manuscript about his experiences in England. He was learning from the English, who had been at this for years, struggling by themselves against Hitler's army. Hitler had the Panzers, which were the tanks that were like huge and scary, but America was making the Sherman tanks and shipping them over to England, and England had their own tanks. And the Sherman tanks although they were smaller than the Panzers, they were so much more profuse. We were turning them out by the thousands. So Hitler he had a couple of big Goliaths, but we had a lot of little Davids around. And I just want to tell you a couple things that I thought was intriguing. Ralph, I call him Ralph, Ingersoll said, one of the strangest things was getting used to the English mind. He said, when I went over there, I saw that they had long been into deception. They had built fake tanks, and they were painting shadows under the tanks for when the German reconnaissance planes went overhead. And Ingersoll was saying what's up with that? You're painting shadows. And he was like really eager to get going and to get America into the war and the war effort. And they were saying, slow down. And he was saying, I don't want to slow down. I'm a doer. And I want to, do. And they were saying, you don't have to do too much detail with the Germans. And he said, but why? These should be better made. The shadows should be real. And they took him aside and they said, we want to tell you something that we learned, you don't know yet, that and I thought this was interesting, the German intel air, which was very good, they used cameras on their planes to take the photographs, but the lenses were absolutely exquisite like they are today.
German glass.
Yeah, but they were single lens reflex cameras. And the English had already developed the double reflex. What do you call that? Anyway, it's not single lens, it's double lens, which means that you have three-dimensional photos. So they said, we don't bother with too much detail because at that altitude, they don't see a thing. Everything is kind of flat, they said, so we don't bother with anything that would require more manpower or more energy to build. So Ingersoll said that was one thing, learning that the Germans could be deceived that way. The second thing was, he said, this blew my mind, that when we started to write on the maps where we were going to attack in Normandy, but it was supposed to look like we were going to attack at Calais, at the Pas de Calais, because it was closest to Dover, the shortest way. So we had to keep up a ruse that the Normandy invasion was a pretend invasion. So that's what was going over the radio. We were only pretending let's pretend that we're going to attack at Normandy, but we're really going to attack at Calais. And that's why Hitler never moved his troops down to Normandy, even as he was getting messages that they're attacking in Normandy. He said, no, it's just a feint. They're going to attack at Calais. And that worked for enough hours, 7 hours, so that the Panzers, all the heavy weight, he pushed everything he had up at Calais. And they had enough time to do the landing at Omaha and at Utah. And of course, the British were at Sword and the other one, Gold Beach, Juno Beach. So he said on the maps when we were drawing the invasion designs, he said, the Americans used blue for us, the good guys, and red for the bad guys, blood. And he said that's from the Revolution, the American Revolution. Washington wore blue, we were blue. And he said when I go over to England, they were scribbling over my work and saying, no, red is the British. We're the good guys. And they said, I think they used black for the enemy. No, blue. I don't know what they used. Anyway, he said it was such a confusing mess, the scribbles and scribbling over, that he said, but we finally worked it out with a merge of the colors. He said, but we still got the blue in for the good guys. I think they used black for Hitler or something. So, and then the other thing he said was that we both spoke English. He said, but even that was problematic. He said, he gives a whole vocabulary list of confusing words. He said, like the word maintenance, that's the only one I remember, maintenance. He said, in military parlance, that means that you take care of the machines, the jeeps and the whatever, the housekeeping, it's maintenance. He said, but in British English, maintenance in military parlance, it means you maintain the boundary that you've occupied. So he said when they were talking about so-and-so is going to be assigned to beach maintenance at Omaha, we thought it meant that they were going to be fixing up the beach, like maybe have a hut or something, when they meant that they were going to hold that beach from the Germans, that they were going to keep that as as a headquarters. So he said it was little things like that. He said it would really, he writes lovely about it if you get a chance to read it. He puts, just like Hemingway, he puts you in the place of the person that's there. So it's riveting, his writing. I'm told that Hemingway really broke through this kind of reporting. Most reporting was, you know, serious reporting, and the American press did not want any bad news to reach the American ears, so everything was censored. And so Hemingway got to his typewriter, and he's writing about these dead bodies are there, and they're young guys, and he would not withhold the truth of what was going on. So he was kind of like a transition person in the way that Americans saw themselves and reflected on themselves, just like during the Civil War. The camera that was invented by then was used to bring home in the newspapers. I was told that the newspapers that landed on the brownstones' footsteps in the morning, that when the people picked up the newspaper, it was so shocking to see the actual casualties that the aristocrats would write into the newspaper saying, we don't want to look at this, we don't want our family to look at this, we want artists, bring in artists to cover the pictures. And that's how Whistler and who else? Yep, how they all got started. They all went out to the front and they painted, at least the painted pictures of dead bodies weren't as gory as the photographs. So this is another transition that America was going through. And one of the, I'm thinking of dead bodies right now. It's kind of a weird feeling when you do this research, because it's crushing to think of what happened. 100,000 soldiers died in the battle on the landing at Normandy, and some of them never even made it to the land. They were shot getting off the boats. And then there's these very funny things, like these ghost army guys running around and doing these ridiculous things that worked. And it kind of gives you a feeling of I don't know what. I guess that's what history does to you. You get involved, I guess. So to kind of move it along toward the end here, we have Ingersoll, who is responsible for coming up with these outrageous ideas, and his British counterpart, because that was the English style, every American had to be counterparted with a British equal, and that's how they held the Americans in check, because the Americans were ready to go, and the British were, they had to think about their population, feeding their population which was a bone of contention. Ingersoll wanted the foodstuffs to go to the armies, to the soldiers, and the British Parliament said, if we don't take care of our people who are responsible for the blackouts, responsible for doing the repair, and they repaired very quickly, because it's such a small, contained place, that they, to their credit, they took as much care of their civilians as they did to their military. That's not true in most countries. But at one point, somebody, who was it? Oh, I might have this wrong, because I'm not going to look at my notes, but Eisenhower was saying, oh no, it was Bradley, was saying we've got to stop the Germans from, I forget where they were, and they said something has to be done. We have to come up with an idea, and Ingersoll was in the room, and everybody looked at him, and he writes in his memoir, he said, they were expecting me to come, so he said, I did. He said, I stood up and I said, yes, there is something that can be done. And they said, what? And he said, I don't know, but I'm going to do it. And he did it. He went back to his British counterpart, who was a very staid, dyed-in-the-wool military man. His mother was the one who introduced Dwight Eisenhower to his wife, Mamie Dowd, over lunch. That's how military he was. His father was a general, his uncle was a general, he was a general, or got to be a general. So everybody remembers Ingersoll as, yes, he was flamboyant, yes, he was loud, yes, he was larger than life, yes, he knew everybody in the arts, he got everybody to do these incredible operations. And I'll just briefly, because that's part of what this is about, the operations of the Ghost Army. It was divided into 4 divisions. They decided that this is one of the artists did this. The top division was the sign painters. They were the ones that did the, their mission was to imitate a unit to look like it was in one place, so the unit could move out of that place and move to another place and surround the army from the back. And they did it all through deception. The Ghost Army came in with inflatable tanks that would be half the size of this room, and inflatable jeeps. They had hundreds of inflatable tanks that came in bags that were made here in America, different parts, so nobody knew what they were putting together. They interviewed the people in the rubber factories. One of the women said, we thought we were making targets. We had no idea, because they kept everything separate. And they would have these air compressors in the middle of the night. They'd move in behind the real unit, start blowing up these tanks. And they said if the air compressors didn't work, we always had bicycle pumps. If the bicycle pumps didn't work, last scenario was we had our own breath and we blew them up. But these were made very cleverly. They were made with, so in case shrapnel hit one part of it, it wouldn't completely deflate, that it would, talk louder?
Talk a little louder, I can barely hear it, so I'm not sure if
Oh,
they can.
I'm sorry. So there were inflatable tanks, jeeps, trucks, lorries, and there was this incredible thing called the sound truck that was under the Sonic label of the Sonic division. That's the last one. They actually, back here in America, they went to Harvard University, asked Harvard, I forget his name, but he was the head of, he was a young guy, 21 years old, but he was a genius, I guess. And they asked him, this is before cassette recordings, they asked him to make recordings of jeeps, trucks, Sherman tanks, backing up, moving forward, pulling into a parking place, and he managed to get this all on hundreds and hundreds of records. They couldn't use the records because the Navy used the records because the Navy was on the sea, but being on a bumpy road in a truck, like the Army would be, the Army couldn't use the records, so he devised a wire recording, which was the forerunner of the cassette recorder, or the tape recorder, eventually. So they made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sounds, and they were such perfectionists, they knew, because they had captured one of the German intel, I forget what the name for the German intel thing, they captured it whole, and they were going through the books. They found out that the Germans knew all about them from their radio interceptions. intercepted with ease. The British had already cracked the Enigma code, but so the Ghost Army used the radio interceptions too. They would put fake conversations in the radio, like, don't tell anybody that we're going to be going to such and such a place. They would use that. They would, oh, this thing really blew my mind, to record the trucks going by into a landing area. I forget what you call that. They put the microphone up, the trucks would go by, and the doppelganger effect would go into, you know, the trucks. When you stand on a highway, a truck comes down the road and it passes you and drops two tones. So they knew that the Germans were so sophisticated they would be able to tell that was faked. So what this guy did was they put the microphone in the middle of a circle and they had the trucks riding around in a circle for hours and hours and hours until they got it really right. And they even put in conversations with a sergeant yelling, "Put out that cigarette, you know, get that ba-ba-ba-ba," and somebody saying, you know, they put in all authentic stuff so that it would really seem like the real unit. Then they had to copy the unit's uniforms. So they're coming up in the dark behind the unit that's about to move, and the Germans are shelling the real unit. They're setting up, they're blowing up, they're putting on fake shoulder patches. They had to start their own little factory of different insignias for every single division that they were copying, and they made them out of tent fabric, and they painted the real symbols, which were embroidered, of course, and they were constantly, they said by the time the end of the war, their shirts were just ripped because they kept slapping different insignias on. But they would imitate, even if they knew, they would send ahead, and this was coordinated, they would send ahead to find out what sport they played during downtime. Some played baseball, others preferred football. So each individual regiment had their own idiosyncrasies, and they would imitate that. They would hang out laundry, fake laundry. They would set up fake headquarters, a fake sentry, and they had fake generals, which is a court-martial, to fake being a general. But they got permission. The one guy, Fred Fox, he wrote a letter, said, "This is impossible. We have to be allowed to impersonate anybody we need to without being court-martialed." He was an actor student down in Georgetown, I think. He wanted to be the next Jimmy Stewart, and then he found himself in the war, but he did his acting during the war. So he got his permission from Eisenhower to impersonate a general, and whoever... Oh, I touched it. They, oh yeah, we were looked on as kind of nutcases because we painted all day by the rest of the, you know, nuts and bolts of the Army. These guys were, this is a comic book studio in Manhattan. These four guys sitting around this table, they all became Ghost Army. I won't go into their names, but they're drawing their cartoons, and they all, their services were used over and over again with artwork for the, I love that comic book guys could help save lives. Here's a paint box. They all carried paint box, and they painted whenever they could. They were all mostly young guys, and they said that any of our downtime, instead of going to the bar, or they did go to the bar, they would paint the people in the bar. There was an art show in Nyack, New York, of the Ghost Army artist work. There was an exhibit. It was a beautiful exhibit that got a lot of attention. This is George, I forget his name. He's on the right, and he's drawing in his little studio. When they got toward the end of the war, they took over Germany. The Americans took over their part of Germany, so they were able to have their pick of where to live, and they So this guy was in a comfy kind of attic art studio, and the guy that was drawing him, his name, I forget his name, but he did the paint of the drawing next, the line drawing of that guy drawing. This one is Arthur Singer. A lot of famous people were young boys in World War II. Arthur Singer, if you look him up, he is like Audubon. He's a very famous natural life paint artist. He's got lots of books. His son worked with him as he got older. He passed away, but he did. I'm sorry that the images aren't as beautiful as these watercolors are. They're so touching. When I first saw them, my heart skipped. They are so sensitive. And here they were fighting just a little while ago. They were liberating this town. This is Trier in Germany. And then they painted it. And this one guy had well, first this one comes. This was made for everybody in the Ghost Army. There were 1,100 men. Everybody got this little gift from one of the artists that wanted to commemorate all their operations. After the war, he had these printed up and mailed to every one of the veterans back then. So Walton Hall was where the Americans were stationed. That's where Ingersoll was stationed. It was a chateau. The Americans had a less than lovely name for it because it was drafty and moldy and beautiful, old, and dank and damp. And it shows the, I think I have one of these. Yeah. Maybe? No? This is my cats. They probably ate it. But it shows the landing at Normandy from the four places of that they started from. This is a list of the operations. There were 21 official. There were a couple more that were unofficial. But 21 times, the first one is called Elephant. That was at Normandy. The next one was called Brittany. They would move in impersonating a unit while the unit would sneak around the back and attack the Nazis from the rear. The Nazis started calling them the Phantoms. The Phantoms were here. They also helped George Patton three times. And they said, and Ingersoll said this too, he said, unusually, Patton, who's this larger-than-life boogeyman, he said he was one of the best people they worked with because he really got with what we were trying to do. Not everybody appreciated the idea of deception in the military, but Patton even contributed more ideas. And Ingersoll said, this guy really, really took you. You thought you hated him, and he turns around and he turns out to be the best thing since sliced bread. But the other generals weren't like that because they wanted to fight. They didn't want to be represented by inflatable balloons. This is one of the paintings from Luxembourg, after Luxembourg was freed, and then they took it over. It's a beautiful painting by this Belisario Contreras. It's a sepia drawing. I wish it was clearer. This is two guys. Syracuse is on the right. The other guy on the left. He found an old grenade case, and he emptied it out, and he used it throughout the war to hold his drawings and his painting equipment. And he's quoted as saying, "I thought because this case contained death, that I would like to restore it with life." And he made a lot of beautiful drawings. They also painted the refugees. There were a lot of refugees. After the war, the Ghost Army was in charge of protecting the refugees. There were Russians. There were a lot of Russians. There were Belgians. There were people that...
All kids, right?
Not all kids.
Oh,
but they were all out of their homes. Nobody had a home. Their homes were bombed. Victor Dowd said, the child on the left, he said, I painted him day after day. He said he never smiled once. And the other were two girls, sisters. This is a painting by Alvin Shaw, and this is Trier in Germany after they crossed the Rhine into Germany. This is some downtime. They're playing double Dutch with the kids. And one of the soldiers is as one end of the line. This is also by Arthur Singer, the wildlife painter, the bird painter. This is one of the paintings he painted. This is him himself. He did a portrait of himself in his Jeep through the rearview mirror of his Jeep while waiting to move on. This is another painting. This gentleman painted this to show, this is really a delicate, beautiful watercolor. He wanted to show the markings on the Jeep because they would actually get, there's only like 4 colors that the Army uses for painting, but they had a little booklet of every single regiment, what kind of markings they would put on their Jeep. So if they were impersonating a general, they would put the 2 stars on the Jeep, paint it, and they would paint the regiment number, and then they would paint over it for the next deception that was going on. This is another painting by Trier. Some of the soldiers would sit next to each other and paint in different styles. This one is a hard one. The artist called it, Please Not Me. This is one that Victor Dowd did of an old man. It doesn't say where he painted it. Okay, and this is Bill Sales. Oh, by the way, this is the book that I took my information on. There's a lot of books out now. This one is called The Ghost Army. It's by a gentleman named Rick Sales. No, I'm getting the names mixed up. Rick Byers and Elizabeth Sales. And Elizabeth Sales' father painted this picture. And Rick Sales became familiar with the story back in 2005, and he was so taken with the story that he started the Legacy, the Ghost Army Legacy Foundation, and he got the legislation in Congress started to have them award the gold medal stars. He's responsible for it. There's also a U.S. Army museum down in New Orleans that exhibited all the stuff that is in this book. And I got in touch with Rick Sales and I said, I'm going to be doing a talk with the Pratt Museum on the Ghost Army. I read your book. I looked at all the stuff online. And I said, would it be amenable to you if I borrowed a few of your pictures and quoted you? And he said, by all means, take the whole book. Well, he didn't say the whole book, but I said the whole book. And so I owe a debt of gratitude for him for being so generous. He was just very giving. So if you want to look up his work, he's done a PBS documentary, he's done his own documentary, and there's also a movie in Hollywood being talked about, but that might go on forever. And he's just a nice guy. Getting toward the end here, the Ghost Army guys had a little exhibit of their own, of their work while they were in Germany. So they made up this card, they invited people, and they had the exhibit of their work, that some of which you've seen today, in a little attic cottage in Germany. And one of the Fred Fox, he kept track of everything, all the operations they did. And there's 35 insignias on this unofficial, official history. And those are all the regiments that they imitated. And they made those insignias, copied them from the real thing. When the US military saw this, they used it as the actual official history because it was under wraps. And here, you can't see it, but this is the gold medal. This is the reverse side. Oh, no, this is the front side. I don't know if you can see it. On the left is a radio operator, and they had the inflatables and all the visual stuff. They had the people that were painting stuff, the special effects guys, but all of it had to be staged on a stage, and the stage was the radio. Their telegraph operators would, now if you go online, it says this is impossible, you can't do this. You can't imitate another person's telegraph style. This is Morse code. But these guys, they found guys that used to play the banjo that were very nimble. These guys were so flexible, they would sit down next to the guy that they were going to be impersonating before the real guy would move out, and he'd take over with them, imitating a style. Now, it's called telegraph fist. That's the military term for a style, and the Germans were very, very up on, they had it down to a T, the style of every single radio man in the US Army. So they knew they could, it's beyond me how they did this, but they determined how often they hesitated, where they made mistakes, where they were inclined to hesitate. And these guys imitated all of that by keeping a diary on every single radio man in the US Army. This is the other side of the gold coin. Up in the top left is the sign of the Ghost Army. One of the artists made a ghost, just like the Ghostbusters. And that became a gold medal. What?
The picture on the bottom. The other picture.
The other picture is the hand. I don't know, it's all symbols of the 4 different parts of the Ghost Army. And with that, and thanks to Ian Ingersoll, who said he'd try to make it today, which we were hoping.
Oh, he did, King.
He lives in Connecticut. And with that, I'm finished.
And where you mentioned, oh, you should read the manuscript. How would you read the manuscript?
It took me a little bit of digging, but I just typed in Ralph Ingersoll, unpublished manuscript, Ghost Army, and it came up in a PDF form.
Okay.
And I couldn't quite figure out how if it's unpublished, then it's published.
Yeah, it's definitely published now.
Yeah.
Why was it declassified this late in the game? Were they using similar deceit tactics currently in war?
They have now what they call TSY, the beginning of the word psychological, ops, psych ops. And that's even being replaced by MISI, and I forget what that means. That's taken the place of the psych ops. But a lot of the veterans begged the military to please declassify so that we can tell our children what we did during the war. We can tell our wives. They didn't even tell their wives because they got that letter that says you'll be shot if you reveal what you did during the your service in the Ghost Army. So all along they've had periodic requests to release it, and back in the 70s they actually did release it, and then they quickly reclassified it because of the Cold War. They just didn't want the enemy to know just how deceitful they were.
Susie, Ingersoll entered the Army as a private. What rank did he rise to
I think it was Major
when he was doing this work?
when he left the Army.
Did he hold the title or anything for this work?
Did he get a title?
Did he hold any kind of title? Director of Ghost Armies or something?
Well, he was in the planning division. I don't know if that.
Planning division, that's good.
He was sent over ahead of time.
Mhm.
Douglas Fairbanks. Does anybody remember Douglas? Anybody watch TCM? Douglas Fairbanks was for real. He was in the Navy, and he was a colonel in the Navy. And he was so excited. He was going over to England and studying just like Ingersoll was. This is before Ingersoll got there. Their deception it blew his mind. And he said, wait a minute, what about sonic, meaning auditory deception? And he worked out all this plan, and the guys over in Britain loved him. This is the top secret guys. They were so excited about him, but they found out that they had to let him go because he was such a celebrity that he couldn't keep his mouth shut, and that everybody, anywhere he went, they gathered around him, and he's talking about this great idea we have to fool the Germans, and it just leaked out all over the place. So, but they did use his idea, they did credit him, he just wasn't active in the deception. He went back to making movies.
There is a principal in the New York City school system, a very creative scheduling thing for kids, because they're supposed to have 40-minute periods, each one 5 days a week. And he wanted to completely change that so that they could do interesting things in an hour and a half. They were much more fun. So I said, how did you pull this off? This was like in the 80s. And he said, building in canvas. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, in the war, they would build in canvas and it would get bombed so that they could put the real tank somewhere else. And so that was how I learned about alternative education in New York City, good New York City high schools.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was, now I understand. So thank you.
Yeah, that's what these guys said. They said our mission was to go out, and if we were really, really good in doing our jobs, we would get shot at. And they didn't have any artillery, real artillery. They had fake artillery, and they had canisters of gunpowder that they'd set off with an automatic lighter that would blow up periodically in the night. That would look like it. But they did have a unit that was supposed to protect them. And they were real soldiers that set up the parameters. And they had to keep everybody away, including American soldiers, because they didn't want it to leak out that it was a fake. And at one point over in France, I had the photo this morning, it's not here now, but over in France, two Frenchmen, one on a bicycle, or both on a bicycle, slipped through the perimeter, and they saw 4 GIs lifting one of the inflatables and turning it around, and they're like, and the guy that was sentry turned around, and these guys knew how to improvise. They turned around and he said, the American GIs are very strong.
I guess that is Superman.
Yes, Carolyn?
So I have not been able to hear all of it, attending to other things. Did you talk at all about how Ralph was a lot like Zadock, or at least Zadock would be invoked whenever Ralph did something clever?
Yes, I didn't say anything about Ralph doing that, but he said growing up, and he grew up in the aristocratic part of Manhattan in a very, very wealthy mansion, and he said whenever he did anything that the family encouraged, they would say, very, very good, you're upholding your ancestral lineage, and whenever he did anything reckless, they said, it's that Zadock Pratt influence in you again. And he would go, yay!
Well, but also the ingenuity. So the kind of creativity, not state, but ingenuity of this endeavor seemed to invoke for him the spirit of his great-grandfather.
And as it turns out, when I did get in touch with Ian Ingersoll, now he's the younger son, and when I told him pretty much what you just said, he said, oh my God, Susie, he said, I've made my whole life I've been a woodworker all my life. I worked with wood like my great-great-grandfather, Zadock Pratt. So he was very proud of that.
So now, Mark, where are all your questions? I stopped you from asking them. Now's the time.
No, I
Oh, you
got
did?
my question before.
Okay.
I didn't know what to say now.
Okay, well, I just wanted, anyone else have? Okay. So we want to thank Susan.